What's up? Hello, everyone. Welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name's Matt.
My name is Dyl, and today we are going to be doing shortlist predictions. It's something that we really haven't done before on the channel, but I feel like will be super fun because this year we have our normal shortlist categories, but we also have some brand new ones like casting, like cinematography. So there's lots to talk about.
And before we begin, I apologize. Audio quality is not going to be as good as normal. I'm recording this on my one working AirPod on my end, but we make do with what we have. But anyways, let's get into it. We're going to talk best original song first. And I think at this point, we can pretty confidently say that the locks in the category have to be I Lied to You from Sinners, Golden from K-pop Demon Hunters, Dear Me from Diane Warren, Relentless, The Girl in the Bubble from Wicked for Good, and No Place Like Home from Wicked for Good, Train Dreams from Train Dreams. And then from there, that's six. Then I think you can kind of get funky with this. So I'm going to put forward a few that I think are in. I'd love to hear your opinion on some others that you think are going to be in, Dylan. First off, I'm going to put forward Salt, Then Sour, Then Sweet from Come See Me in the Good Light. This is a song by Sarah Bareilles and Brandi Carlile from a documentary that is likely to get in not just to the documentary shortlist, but is win competitive in the documentary category. These are two Grammy superstars, and we know that Grammy love can translate to some Oscar love. I'm also going to say that I feel like we're going to get Clothed by the Sun from The Testament of Anne Lee is going to be in the shortlist, though likely not in for the nomination. And I'll let you talk about the two F1 songs and Sinners, but I'll bring up a couple of indie songs that I think will make the shortlist, being My San Francisco from Plain Clothes and My Baby Got Nothing at All by Japanese Breakfast from Materialists. Oh, and also Highest to Lowest from Highest to Lowest.
Highest to Lowest is one where I feel like it could potentially even get both of its songs in, including the A$AP Rocky song, because sometimes with a long list or short list, whatever you want to call it, of 15, you have room to pull some more cooler type nominations. And like you said, the F1 songs, they submitted three. I don't think all three will make the short list, but I think Drive, Ed Sheeran, like you mentioned, they like their pop stars. I think this is the one that they seem to be putting more money behind. So I think this is good for the short list, as well as Lose My Mind, the Doja Cat and Don Toliver song, which I know both you and I prefer to Drive, but so far critics groups aren't really shining out for that one as much. I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure the Weeknd song from Avatar: The Way of Water did make the short list, but missed out on the nomination. So I would expect Miley Cyrus's Dreamless One to follow in those footsteps. And sometimes they still go out for the Disney movies, regardless if that's a live action film or an animated. So maybe something like Zoo from Zootopia or Waiting on a Wish from Snow White can round out our list of 15 as one of those songs that has no shot of getting a nomination, but can fit into a list of 15.
I've kind of lost hope in Waiting on a Wish, even though I think it's a great song. I just haven't seen it pop up anywhere, even like the Hollywood Music and Media Awards. They didn't even give it a mention. But I'm with you. I think we've got both F1 songs. I think we got both Sinners songs. And I think we're going to have both Wicked for Good songs. But right now, I feel pretty confident about like I'd say probably 12 or 13 of my 15. So moving on to the score top 20. This is exhausting. The list of 20 that they're making us do for this, that's insane. But something we learned last year from this, they go out for a lot of sequels and a lot of big budget movies. So I tried to balance and throw in some of those alongside the guarantees of Sinners, One Battle After Another, Marty Supreme, Hamnet, Frankenstein, Train Dreams, Jay Kelly, F1, Anne Lee, Begonia. I think we're also going to be seeing Wicked for Good. I think we're also going to be seeing the Fantastic Four First Steps. I think we are going to see Tron Ares, despite its poor box office perception and critic perception. I also think we'll see Superman. And to throw out a couple of films that haven't performed the best, but feel like the type of movie that would just show up on the bottom of the shortlist here, I'm going to toss in Ballad of a Small Player, Rental Family, and Head Up.
We saw last year when they extend out to 20, yes, they do more blockbuster type movies, but they also just pull some more memorable or original type scores that are very different from the rest of the competition. So I think something like The Smashing Machine or A Bold, Big, Beautiful Journey, or one that neither of us has mentioned yet that just got a Golden Globe nomination, being Sarat, can show up here in a lineup of 20.
Well, I think that we're going to get a few of those international films in here. Sarat, No Other Choice. There's even a chance of Sentimental Value making the short list of 20.
I guess the only other film that I have here in my 20 that you have yet to mention would be Elio. I think that they do typically give shout outs to these animated films. Inside Out 2 made the list last year. I think Elio can follow suit. And I mean, Avatar Fire and Ash. Yes, Way of Water didn't get the nomination, it still made the long list. And I think the score here is equally, if not as good as the previous one.
That's the question to me is I just don't know what new was added in that film. But I say that every year, and every year I'm wrong about something that actually turns out to have more new material than I thought it did. So you're right. I totally should have Avatar Fire and Ash on here because that would make a lot of sense. I also don't have a lot of horror on here, but I feel like they could fit some weird horror picks into this list. Like Weapons could absolutely make the list, which would be really cool. That's a great score.
Just going through awards expert, I mean, we've mentioned pretty much everything here. There's After the Hunt, another Reznor and Ross score. There is K-pop Demon Hunters, which I think just got deemed ineligible due to not having enough score. But I think if it was eligible, it would be something that we would see in the long list.
So let's move on to the best sound list, which is a list of 10. It's pretty safe to say on this list, we are going to be seeing One Battle After Another, Sinners, F1, Avatar Fire and Ash, Wicked for Good, Warfare, Frankenstein, and I would even say House of Dynamite, I think, has a spot secured on the sound shortlist. So that's 8 that I think are pretty solid. The last 2 spots, though, that's the question mark. And right now, I'm leaning towards Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning, and The Lost Bus. But I think that you can really make an argument for either Superman or Fantastic Four First Steps.
Frankenstein is something that makes total sense, but also is something that I feel like this branch would often gatekeep from their shortlist. And I think that we could see something more typical to like a Predator Badlands or a Tron Ares that fits more akin to those random nominations that we would get when this category was split in 2, but now it's in 1. It's will these films get in, will they won't. What we saw last year is that they would go out for a film like Blitz. They will go out for a film like Joker Folie à Deux that didn't have much notices in any other category, but they could recognize the sound work was still good and enough to make a lineup of 10. And I mean, hey, last year they did the Wild Robot got a long list mention here. So maybe there is a film like K-pop Demon Hunters that can surprise here. But I agree with you. I think the majority of the other ones that you mentioned are definitely here. And I think that Fantastic Four should show up. MCU typically has at least one slot here, while on the other hand, DC, with the exception of the Batman movies and Wonder Woman, which you hit to throw a huge asterisk for Wonder Woman 1984 because that was the COVID year. Every other DC movie has always just blanked with visual effects, with sound, and Superman will be the real test. We've already seen it miss the Golden Globe box office award. So how will the industry react to, and I guess more specifically, the specific categories of voter bases react to it here at the Oscars?
I also just want to put out the possibility there. We saw the Critics' Choice Awards go for Surratt and sound. Surratt could absolutely show up in my top 10. And you know what? I think earlier I wrote The Lost Bus. I think I'm going to write Surratt right now.
I think Surratt makes a lot of choice for a passion type pick, and I feel like it's one of those where if it makes the short list, like we do in makeup every year, we're like, oh, this movie's here. Now we have to really consider it for the nomination. And I think that is the biggest hurdle for Surratt at the moment, where I personally don't think it will make the lineup of 10, but if it makes the 10, it immediately goes to my 5 slot.
So let's move on to VFX. And there's some big, big questions here, which is mainly for me, what does the VFX branch gatekeep? Because always, every year, they gatekeep something. There's usually a big movie that is getting VFX awards, but the actual VFX artists are not the biggest fan of the work. Think Everything Ever All at Once. Think Oppenheimer. Think Poor Things. These films that did extremely well above the line and won VFX awards in other places without actually making. I think Poor Things did make the shortlist, but it wasn't nominated. But Everything Ever All at Once, Oppenheimer are great examples of films that were perceived as VFX frontrunners and then didn't even make the shortlist because they were gatekept. So the big question for me is Sinners. Does that happen here? Do we see that in VFX, or is that the yearly big movie that's gatekept? Right now, I'm playing it safe and I have Sinners in, but I could easily see it drop off of the VFX list.
Sinners is such an interesting case when it comes to visual effects because there's a lot of work being done. Because I mean, we have 2 Michael B. Jordans oftentimes in the same very shot. Right there is a prime example of visual effects in almost every frame of the movie. But outside of that, there's not much noticeable visual effects works. A lot of the stuff that is done to the vampire characters is mostly prosthetic and makeup based. So it's one of those things where I totally agree. It could be our random surprise we're going to snub this out because if we don't, it's going to get the nomination and we want other things. I also think, akin to what I just mentioned, the last category, Frankenstein and Superman could be potential other candidates for that weird film to miss out on the nomination because with visual effects, they tend to year in and year out for the short list and the long list to include films that have zero shot of the actual nomination that always seem to get the short list mention. And this year, that's stuff like Jurassic World, we keep mentioning, but that's stuff like Tron Ares, where this is the stuff that this branch likes to include in a lineup of 10 or a lineup of 15 that doesn't really have a real shot for the nomination.
And of course, the movies that are 100% showing up here: Avatar Fire and Ash, Wicked for Good, F1, Fantastic Four First Steps, Predator Badlands, and Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning.
One film that I think could show up in a lot of shortlists, I don't believe has much Oscar prospects, but it fits a lot of these categories would be How to Train Your Dragon. Because I mean,
Mhm.
what we saw what upon its release is the visual effects were pointed out, the production design, the costumes, the makeup. It's just it doesn't seem like Universal's doing much for that movie. It's all for Wicked. So I'll be interested to see, despite that, can it show up here due to what we would assume would be some more guild type love for that film? And does that knock out anything, or does that miss to give room for something like you mentioned before, like Frankenstein?
So let's move on to the makeup and hair category, which this year feels like it's going to be dominated by the horror and creature makeup effects, those being Frankenstein. I think Wicked for Good honestly counts with the transformation for Ethan Slater and for Jonathan Bailey. Sinners is definitely going to be up there. Weapons, 28 years later. And then we've also got in the mix Predator Badlands. And aside from that, of course, we have to consider the biopic makeup that makes it in year after year. And that this year is The Smashing Machine, Blue Moon, and I would throw in Japan's submission to the Oscars, Kokuho, which is a really big use of makeup. It's all set in kabuki theater. Everyone is done up in ridiculously huge makeup. And I think that is going to be the example that you said of it made the short list. Now we have to seriously consider it for a nomination. And I'm just going to shout out one other, and then this is my whole 10. Alpha, Julia Ducournau. It's another bit of creature horror makeup, but it's really beautifully done, even though the film was not really loved by many people whatsoever. The makeup work, I think, is something that it's impossible to walk away from without shouting that out. And I think the industry will respond to it.
Something that this category tends to do for their shortlist is give a lot of love to former nominees and branch favorites. And this year, we're kind of lacking with a lot of those outside the top contenders, like you mentioning, with stuff like The Smashing Machine and Wicked for Good and Frankenstein. But one of those, which is such a weird pull, and it's a film that no one's talked about since January, would be Wolfman. They have former nominees on their team. It's just the makeup was kind of called out as being not great inside the movie, but it could be something like The Last Voyage of Demeter that does show up at the end of the day. On awards expert, I see there's a lot of people for like Begonia and Hamnet and 28 Years Later. Those are three films I don't really expect to show up on the short list at the moment, but I think that what we could see is what we're going to see a lot throughout award season is the overt love for something like One Battle After Another, and for the work that is done to Sean Penn and the various hairstyling that's done throughout the movie could land its spot on the lineup of 10 here.
One Battle After Another is going to be one that this is a spot where they can show extra strength that they don't need. They don't need a makeup shortlist. But if they're on it, then it really shows that they're just spraying love for it all over the place. So now let's move to cinematography, which is going to be somewhere between 10 to 20. So I settled on 15 that I think will be making the cinematography shortlist. And the ones that I think are sure things for this are One Battle After Another, Sinners, Frankenstein, Hamnet, Train Dreams, Marty Supreme, Begonia, F1, and The Testament of Annalee. And I think after that, I could round out a 10 and say Avatar Fire and Ash.
The first film I want to shoot out there is a film that both of you and I have gotten so much flack for not being supporters on this channel for, but Neon's put a lot of stuff out there for The Secret Agent in cinematography. They've sent the cinematographer out for lots of Q&As, and I feel like this is something where if this film is showing more and more strength, if this is a real Best Picture contender, I think it could make a lineup of 10, if not a lineup of 20, potentially, like what this category says it could have. You mentioned Avatar Fire and Ash. I think if we're going to get more towards the 15 to 20 range, Wicked for Good will show up due to how many mentions the previous film got. The more you send out this category, I feel like you kind of have to include it. And that's kind of the same way I feel about some other films that are very much cinematography bait, you could say, of something like Nouvelle Vague, or it was just an accident, or even the Smashing Machine, where these are things where I don't think we're going to contend much in a lot of these other shortlist categories. But for cinematography, if we get closer to that 15 to 20 range, are films I would expect to show up there.
I would also add in Jay Kelly to that. I think that is total cinematography bait, as is Sound of Falling, which was the runner up at the Camera Image Film Festival this year, a film festival dedicated exclusively to cinematography.
So that will now move us over to the best casting category. This is one of our brand new categories this year. So we're gonna have a lot of fun here with what will make a potential shortlist because you can pull from the Guild, you can pull from BAFTA. We don't know what you can really pull from this moment. But if we had to give out some potential locks that should be here, if they're not here, it would be a crazy head scratcher. You have stuff like Sinners, One Battle After Another, Hamnet, Marty Supreme, and maybe we can even extend out to something like Sentimental Value, Wicked for Good, or Frankenstein. But I feel like those films could miss out or are very comfortably into our lineup. It just really depends on what this branch wants to go for.
I would also add in Jay Kelly to the casting top 10. I think that that is such a big ensemble cast. And in fact, it's looking more and more likely to be our SAG ensemble nominee that does not make the Oscar lineup. That and Wicked for Good. One of those two will do the SAG, no Oscar. I also think that we're going to see It Was Just an Accident and Weapons both show up to round out the list here. But outside of that, I'm kind of struggling to think what could be the other contenders, because I feel like that this has to kind of align with the acting categories.
Well, the first one I would throw out doesn't really align with the acting categories, but goes more towards what this category I would assume is made for and what we have seen campaigned super hard. And that's The Long Walk. I know it's a movie that you really don't enjoy, but some of the early precursors of critics groups had been mentioning this film either in a lineup of five or a lineup of 10. And I think it's one of those things that could do very well at the Guild and potentially even win its category because it won't be going against a lot of the more juggernauts of the contenders here. And as I mentioned a few categories ago in cinematography, The Secret Agent, I think, has a great case for a casting mention. They cast so many big name talent from Brazil and put them into very against type roles. And I think it's something that it could make a lineup here, especially if this movie continues to rise up the ranks of Best Picture.
We also have to not completely forget Wake Up Dead Man, although that film has been slipping and slipping more and more, being the first Knives Out movie to make no Golden Globe nominations, no Critics' Choice nominations. Did it get Best Comedy at Critics' Choice? I don't
I
know.
don't think it did.
I don't pay attention to that category, so I don't know that off the top of my head. But let's move to the international category, which we're already talking a lot about because those films are popping up in all of the other categories. We can very safely say right now that the five Neon films are all going to be on the short list. That's Sentimental Value, It Was Just an Accident, No Other Choice, The Secret Agent, and Surat. All five of those locked in. I think it's also safe to say we've got locks in Left-Handed Girl, The Voice of Hind Rajab, President's Cake, and A Poet. Now, Arno and I did this category before, and one film that we heavily underrated at the time that has since climbed up like crazy is the Argentinian film Belén. Now, that film, when we spoke about it back in early September, had not screened really anywhere outside of Argentina. It just seemed like a film that was going to be dumped on Amazon Prime. No one was talking about it. It has since been talked about a ton. Amazon has been pushing it like crazy. And I think that it could be a film to make a run at a shortlist mention. So I'm putting that on mine, as well as Sound of Falling, Japan submission Kokuho, which I also mentioned for makeup, All That's Left of You, The Love That Remains, and My Father's Shadow.
Yeah, we basically have 14 of the 15 overlapping. I just don't have Japan's submission, and I have 2,000 meters getting in here again, following the footsteps of the director's previous film, which did win documentary. It had more visibility that time around. Maybe this time around, there's not enough hype for it, so it maybe misses out here. But typically, the long list here for international feature does include at least one doc, and I feel like this is our best case for that. But you mentioned some of the other ones I would have shouted out, like The Love That Remains, Homebound, My Father's Shadow, which is hitting all the festival rounds and getting good enough buzz where I feel like they can make a lineup of 15. But the thing about international feature is there's always one weird, shocking surprise snub, maybe not of a potential nominee, but of a film that you feel like is comfortably in your top 10 or top 15. And this year, I don't feel like you can be bold enough to be like, oh, it's one of the Neon Five or it's one of the first few three out. But I feel like when we get to next Tuesday, something from the consensus top nine might miss out. And that may shake up the race a lot if it's something like one of the Neon Five, or maybe it doesn't factor in much, like if it's President's Cake or Left-Handed Girl or Hen Rajav.
I think it could be The President's Cake, which is a film that we've all been saying is going to do exceptionally well, that hasn't actually shown up anywhere yet. That is probably at the most risk of all of the films that we've been saying are the consensus for the entire year. Now, let's move on to our final shortlisted category, Best Documentary Feature, where I'm going to say, I mean, you can't say anything is a lock here. You never can, because every year something big gets left off the documentary shortlist. But I think it's pretty safe to say we're going to see Put Your Soul on Your Hand and Walk, Come See Me in the Good Light, The Tale of Cillian, The Perfect Neighbor, 2,000 Meters to Andreevka, and Cover Up. I think those six feel relatively safe, which means at least one of them is going to miss.
And that's the real question, is which one misses? Is it our potential win contender of The Perfect Neighbor, or is it one of its strongest competitors like Put Your Soul in Your Hand and Walk or Cover Up or one of the other films that you had just mentioned there? And I think that's where the real question comes here, because no one's going to go 15 for 15 with the documentary long list here.
No.
It's, can you go even 10 of 15? Because your next films in line all, I feel like, have reasons to why they wouldn't show up, like Mr. Nobody Against Putin or My Undesirable Friends, Predators, The Alabama Solution, Apocalypse in the Tropics. All of those films have positives, but they also have shown some sort of weakness over the last few weeks. Or it's My Undesirable Friends, which is nearly 6 hours long, which this branch typically doesn't throw super, super long films on their short list.
Well, to be fair, this branch did award an 8-hour documentary back in 2016. So nothing is impossible. But I think we're also going to see a couple of celebrity docs pop up, being Orwell 2 plus 2 equals 5, and My Mom Jane, a film by Mariska Hargitay. And then I feel like we got to see some of those Sundance movies, Cutting Through Rocks, Seeds. One last thing I'll say about documentary is that I just recently watched The Perfect Neighbor. And after all this talk of The Perfect Neighbor is going to be our winner this year, I don't see it now. I really don't see it after watching the movie. The reason that I don't think it's a win contender is not because I don't like it. It's like I like the film perfectly well. It's just too cold. It's too formal. It's the same reason that that short documentary from last year, Incident, which just cut together body cam footage and security cameras, it's the same reason that didn't win. This is a film that presents. It says, this is exactly what happens. And then it sort of lets you feel that. But it's not making those statements for the audience, which I think Oscar documentaries typically do a little bit more of. You don't just present footage. You really edit the hell out of it. And The Perfect Neighbor, despite its Critics' Choice Editing nomination, doesn't edit the hell out of the footage to really like make its point. It kind of just lets it be, which I think is the film's greatest strength. But it's also why I don't see it winning.
That doesn't bring us to a conclusion of our Oscar shortlist predictions. The official shortlist will come out on Tuesday. We will be back here to react to them either live or in our weekly recap videos. So you'll want to make sure to consider subscribing if that's something that sounds interesting to you.
And thank you so much for watching. As always, my name's Matt.
My name's Dill, and this has been Fantasy Filmball.